I'd like to announce I got new tennis shoes just for today's debate. That's how I honor both of these candidates. My neighbor, Tim Griffin in the Heights, and a woman who's a big fan of mine, Joyce Elliott. She's got my haircut.
I'm a big fan of yours too.
First of all, ladies and gentlemen, this will be is being seen right now on THV 2, which is on cable in Central Arkansas. It will be streamed. It is being streamed on THV2.com and today's THV.com. They will be able to see it and witness this statewide. First of all, by just a little survey, how many people have already voted? We just by applause. Oh, yes, by applause. By applause. How many people? Okay, that is the last time you can applaud in today's debate. There'll be no cheering, no applause. If we catch you applauding or cheering a candidate, you will be publicly humiliated on today's THV. There are questions from the audience. If you have one, they must be in a form that can be asked verbatim of both candidates. Verbatim, because we will ask the same question of each candidate. Here is the format for today's debate. I will ask a question of candidate A, who will be given 1 hour to respond to the question. Candidate B will be given an hour to give that response. I have 10 questions. We should be finished by Election Day. Actually, I lied. Gee, what a surprise. The opening will be given by 2 minutes, or given 2 minutes. The closing, you will each be given 2 minutes. I will ask a question of candidate A, who will answer for 1 minute. A response of 1 minute from candidate B. I will ask the same question of candidate B, and then candidate A will have 1 minute to respond. Is everybody clear? You all please observe the timekeepers. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. By coin toss, Joyce Elliott will be given her 2-minute opening first. Ms. Elliott. Don't make me come down there.
Thank you, Craig, and thanks for those clear and explicit directions. Thanks to Political Animals for hosting us here today, and thank all of you for showing up. It is my distinct honor to stand before you to ask you to consider me to be your next Congresswoman. And I do so not because I feel entitled to ask you that. I do so because I've spent a lifetime working to make things better in our state and in our country. I was a school teacher for 30 years, and I did that by design, because when I graduated from college, and that college, by the way, was Southern Arkansas University, I asked myself the question, what can I do to best help my state and help my country? And for me, public service was that answer. And that public service manifested itself as a school teacher, which I was proud to do for all those years. I'm a mother. I grew up in South Arkansas in a little bitty town called Willisville, 9 people in my graduating class. So I was always in the top 10, as we say. It was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful thing. But I also have had the privilege of serving in the Arkansas legislature. And I have been a champion of balancing what I thought was good for our state and good for our country to do the best we can for our people. I've always supported small businesses and worked at helping us advance economic development in the state. I'm the person on this stage who's actually helped to create jobs, not just talked about it. I'm the person on this stage who's worked with both Governors Huckabee and Beebe to bring jobs to our state in the form of Caterpillar, LM Glass Fiber, HP in Conway, and many others. So as one who cares about what happens to our state and to our country, I say to you, please give me your consideration. As I have demonstrated, I am committed to my state and to my country. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you all so much for having us here today. Thank you to Political Animals. Particularly want to thank my wife, who is here at the front. If I did not have someone who supported me at home, this would be a lot more difficult process than it has been. And I appreciate her for being so supportive and so solid for over a year now, as I got in September of last year. I grew up in South Arkansas as well. I grew up in Magnolia. My mom's a teacher. My dad's a pastor. And I went to public school, graduated from Magnolia High School, went to Hendricks in Conway here in the district, that conservative college up in Conway, some of you are familiar with. Went to Tulane to law school and had a lot of great opportunities in the state and out of the state. And once I found the woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, we came home and settled down for good. My wife is from Camden, and I've got a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old. When I look at this country, I see a country with some great challenges, and I want an America where my kids will be able to pursue their dreams and have the opportunity that I had. So in this campaign, I have focused on 2 things in particular: private sector job creation and dealing with the national debt, getting our fiscal house in order. Those are 2 critical issues for our country, and if we don't address those, we're not going to be able to address a lot of the others. When it comes to jobs and job creation, Caterpillar out here, they've supported me and are supporting me through their PAC. The NFIB, which represents small business, they're supporting me in this race. Chamber of Commerce, which is bigger business, they're supporting me in this race. They're supporting me because they know that I have a common sense perspective. I'm asking for your help and your vote. Thank you.
All right, first question, Ms. Elliott, you have 1 minute to respond. You've already touched on it, but let's go into greater detail. The biggest buzzword over and over in this campaign, jobs. We have seen a record number of hard hats used in TV ads by politicians. What can you do as Arkansas's 2nd District Congressman to improve the job prospects of Arkansans? 1 minute.
Well, I do have a record at the state level, as I've already talked about, but I think some of the things that we can do. We absolutely need to invest in training for workers. And one of the biggest things that's happened to our country is that we've lost jobs overseas. We need to make sure we are closing tax loopholes that send jobs overseas. We have people sitting in this audience and people that I know personally who's lost jobs because of that. We need to make sure we're also investing in renewables and jobs that are technologically based, because these are the jobs of the future. And we need to finally make sure we are listening to, more than anybody else, small businesses and responding to what their needs are, because small businesses hire most of the people in this country. So as I have been campaigning, I've been talking with folks who own these small businesses. I've supported them. I will continue to do so, whether it's through tax incentives or helping them out with lifting some regulations or being more responsive about the way the government requires them to do work they think they should not do. But the small businesses are the backbone of our country, and those are the folks we need to make sure we're responding to and supporting.
Griffin, 1 minute.
I agree that small business is absolutely critical to job creation. I'm a member of NFIB. I'm a small businessman. My house, my clothes, my car, my family is fed from my own small business. But the number one thing that a congressman from this district can do, congresswoman, congressman from this district can do, is eliminate uncertainty. If you talk to small business people and big business people all across this district, they're the people that create the jobs. I have heard more than anything that the number one obstacle to job creation is uncertainty. Uncertainty over card check, uncertainty over cap and trade, uncertainty over the expiration of the 01-03 tax cuts, uncertainty over the expiration of the estate tax, uncertainty over the regulations that have yet to be written as part of the health care law that has been passed. Many regulations are still being written, and we don't know what the rules of the game are. Uncertainty as it relates to the new financial reform bill, which passed, became law, and is punishing our community banks. We've got to eliminate uncertainty.
And by the rules of the debate, we'll ask again the question of you, Mr. Griffin. What can you do as Arkansas's 2nd District Congressman to improve the job prospects of Arkansans?
Well, I'll continue my answer there. Not only do we have to address the uncertainty, but there are a lot of positive things that we can do as well. We help, John is leaving the room, we help develop this world market, this global marketplace. And I believe in trade internationally, and I believe it has lifted a lot of people out of poverty and given us opportunities to export our goods. But now that we've got these big competitors, such as China and others, we can't stand where we always been. We can't stay stagnant. We have got to change and become more so that we can compete. I hear stories every day of people coming back from China, and businessmen say, the folks in China were willing to do anything it takes to get our business. We've got to have that attitude here, and we can do it. Caterpillar, I've toured it and wore a hard hat out there. Caterpillar is a perfect example of manufacturing in the United States that can succeed.
Ms. Elliott, 1 minute response.
Well, I do not think we have to do whatever it takes if it means we're going to do the same thing that China does to have our jobs here in our country. Because in China, there are very few regulations at all. We don't need to be over-regulated. But do we really want to have our workers treated the same way they're treated in China? Is that what we want for America? No. What we want is fair trade, not free trade that will cause us to be reduced to, I think, the same things that we have criticized other countries for. Work is important to people in this country, but America has been the leader in making sure that we treat workers with respect, that we give families an opportunity to have not just a minimum wage, but a living wage. And to talk about uncertainty as if it's something that's never been there before, I think is just a little bit disingenuous, because anytime you're making laws, anytime you're making changes, there is going to be uncertainty. So if we're going to go down the uncertainty road, what about the last 8 years when all these things were still the case? It's something a little bit more than uncertainty that we need to be facing up to.
Second question goes to Mr. Griffin first. Another buzzword in all campaigns, the debt, now over $14 trillion total. How do we reduce that? What is your role? And be specific.
First of all, I'd like to say that I agree with her on China in the sense that we don't want to have our workers here in China. I was not making I was not comparing our workers here in China, in the United States, to workers in China. What I'm saying is China's going out of their way to do things to get business, and we have to change to compete, number one. Number two, with regard to debt, let's just say this. There is plenty of blame to go around. There is plenty of blame for both parties with regard to the debt. There's plenty of blame for the American people. There's plenty of blame for this current Congress and for past Congresses. So we have to start with that premise. We have spent too much money. The past president spent too much money. The reason I focus on the current president is because he's the one in charge. Be specific. First of all, we should take the budget for the federal budget. We could go back to the pre-Obama levels and freeze the numbers there, and I'll go up in the other minute.
Ms. Elliott, 1 minute response.
Well, I think the big thing we need to do is take a look at our spending. We can make some different choices about some of the spending that we're doing, and we just have to, at some point, face up to it and look at our budget in a responsible adult way. But in a very specific thing we could do is close tax loopholes, because we lose billions and billions of dollars that we are giving to companies to take jobs overseas. And the other thing we can do is extend the tax breaks that we've been talking about throughout this campaign. Extend the tax breaks for those folks who are making $250,000 and under, but not extend it for those who are making more. Because if we extend it for those who are making more, we will add $700 billion to the deficit. We can help that situation by not adding that money to the deficit. It would be fantastic, and I would love for everybody to have a tax break. But at some point, we have to do at the federal level what I have had to do for years in the Arkansas legislature, and that's be fiscally responsible to help balance budgets. I've done that for years.
And Ms. Elliott, we ask the question of you again. The buzzword, the debt, now over $14 trillion total. How do we reduce that? What is your role? And be specific.
Well, I think it's some of what I just said. I think as a congresswoman, which I hope to be from the 2nd District, I think it's important to work with other people and not assume that my way is the only way of addressing these big issues. We have a commission that is headed by Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles, and they are going to bring back some ideas about how we should address deficit situations. I don't know that everything they're going to say is something I'm going to want to do, but I do know it's my responsibility to not turn my head and act as if it's something that we should not attack, because that's part of what we are elected to do. But as I said earlier, we're going to have to think about these things, about tax loopholes. I would be, for example, if we are so concerned about what the tax rate is and companies are having to pay so much they want to go overseas, we ought to look at lowering the tax rate and just closing the loopholes so that companies have to do the same thing that you and I do. We don't get to set up a company overseas and therefore pay less in our taxes. Every time we open another loophole, we add to the deficit situation.
Mr. Griffin, 1 minute response.
Well, I was saying in the prior segment, first of all, we should take the federal budget, go back to pre-Obama levels, and freeze it there in the short term, and stop the automatic growth of the agency budgets. That's number one. Number two, the non-defense domestic spending has increased 84%. 84% in the last 2 years. You can like that kind of spending or not like that kind of spending, but regardless, it is unsustainable. The good news here is this pretty much the same as the bad news. The bad news is that we're out of money. The good news is because we're out of money, we're going to be forced to address some of this stuff, and we're going to be forced to address it immediately. With regard to the 01 and 03 tax cuts, I think they ought to be extended. And if we want to go find savings somewhere else to reduce spending, let's do it. A lot of small businesses are counting on those, but regardless, we need some certainty now. Congress should not have come back home for the election to not address this issue.
All right, Ms. Elliott, question 3 begins with you. Entitlements. How do you regard Social Security and its future, as well as Medicare and Medicaid?
Well, my mother is very concerned about what our positions are on, especially Social Security. That is her only source of income. And that makes it very personal for me. But I don't care about it just because it's personal for me. But I think it's important for us to remember that Social Security is a pact between generations. And we have to make sure that it is not tampered with. We have to make sure that it is solvent. Oftentimes, we hear that Social Security is a part of the budget deficit. It is not. Social Security is solvent to 2037 or 2041. And that's not to say that we don't need to be concerned about making sure it's solvent going forward. We do. But it's important to make sure we are not putting out wrong statements about the situation right now. So I think it's really important that we do what we can to make sure Medicare, Social Security, and to the extent that we can, Medicaid remain intact. But we absolutely have to get some control, I think, over spending in Medicaid. And there are some things I think we can do to make sure we do that.
Mr. Griffin.
First of all, with regard to Social Security, my mother is also on Social Security, and she is deeply concerned about it, as am I. I oppose privatization of Social Security, and I think if you want to see the type of solution, not in terms of necessarily the substance, but the type of bipartisan solution, if you go back and look at what Reagan and Tip O'Neill did by coming together in the early 80s, I think that is the way that we're going to have to address this, because President Obama is going to be there at least 2 more years, and we can't wait for something that might happen in the future. We need to work together in a bipartisan way now to address it. With regard to Medicare, Medicaid, and other entitlements, the biggest problem that we have with regard to Medicaid and Medicare is the cost of health care. And the health care law that was just passed, that this administration and this Congress spent a year on, does not address costs, and I'll pick up there in the next segment.
And we'll re-ask the question, entitlements. How do you regard Social Security and its future, as well as Medicare and Medicaid? Please continue, Mr. Griffin.
With regard to the health care law that passed and is now the law of the land, there are a lot of reasons that I oppose that law. But one of the reasons is The thing that needed to be addressed was cost. Now, this bill attempted to address accessibility to health care, but it absolutely did nothing to address and rein in long-term cost. And that is the biggest component of all the entitlements that continues to go up. Now, what I think we need to do in that area, there's not going to be one solution. Philosophically, we need to approach health care the way we need to approach all of our problems, which is we shouldn't care how we've always done it necessarily. We need to be open to new ideas and innovation. The health care law that passed was heavy on government spending, created a new government entitlement, and created numerous new government agencies. I don't believe more government's the answer to what ails us. I think we need innovative pooling, cross-state competition, tort reform, and many other market-based solutions.
Ms. Elliott, 1 minute response.
While it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, the health care bill will, in fact, help out with saving and help us reduce the deficit. That's important to know. And when it comes to privatization, my opponent, Mr. Griffin, has said he does not favor privatizing Social Security. And this is one of those places where I just have to ask, how do we believe that? Because on the one hand, he supports the Paul Ryan bill that has 3 things in it, and one of the major things is privatizing Social Security. He is supported by the Club for Growth, who actually says, and I quote, privatize Social Security, hell yeah. So we need to make sure we get the facts straight here. If just because you say on your website that you don't support privatizing, but the folks who support you and the policies that you support has that as a net effect, that raises a question about what is believable here. Just because you say it does not make it so. What you actually support, I think, is the thing we ought to take a look at. An important question.
Mr. Griffin, question 4 to you. Where do you stand on the Bush tax cuts?
I think they should be extended. Now, on the issue of credibility, I think this is a good time to talk about credibility. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe a word I say. You can simply read the Democrat Gazette, and if you don't want to believe them, you can, if you don't want to believe them, you can read the Washington Post. If you don't want to believe them, you can read Nancy Pelosi's hometown newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, which called my opponent's ad one of the egregious lies of 2010. Now, these are not right-leaning publications, particularly the San Francisco Chronicle and the Washington Post. So I spent almost my entire hour at the AETN debate addressing false attacks. I'm all for contrasting with your opponent, but you can't just rely on a left-wing blogger as your source. You've got to have facts. And so I just ask you to take a look at those publications. On the 0103 tax cuts, I think they ought to be extended completely. It is true. I'm sorry, I ran out of time.
Ms. Elliott, your 1 minute response.
Well, I think you cannot depend on the Democrat Gazette editorial as your fact base either, because an editorial is by design an opinion. And the first attack ad that went up on TV was one by Mr. Griffin that was totally based on what was said in the Democrat Gazette editorial. And as far as for anything I have said out there, I will absolutely challenge you to take a look at what's been said by folks who have done their homework. I have not made up anything about Mr. Griffin. When we talk about what happened with Bud Cummins and Mr. Griffin getting his job, that information is directly in the Inspector General's report. You can check it for yourself. I did not. If you're going to quote the Democrat Gazette and you're going to say that I can't report to you that Crew, which by the way is a bipartisan group, Crew is the one who said you're one of the 11 most corrupt candidates out there. I did not say that. I have a right to report what's there. And if you're going to do that, I respect it. Check the sources. I'm comfortable with what I've done.
Ms. Elliott, the question once again to you, where do you stand on the Bush tax cuts?
I think it would be absolutely a good thing to extend the tax cuts for those people who are making $250,000 and under, because this is the middle class. I have spent my life in this state and around the country making sure folks have an opportunity to get into the middle class and trying to alleviate some of the burden of taxes on the middle class. So I think that would be a good thing. But let's remember, this tax break is scheduled to expire, and it's in the legislation December 31st, 2010. If we're going to do something to help 98% of the people and save $700 billion by not extending it to 2%, who are doing just fine, I might add, I think that's a good thing to do. Mr. Griffin talks a great deal about the deficit and how we need to do something about it. How can you advocate for doing something about the deficit when for 2% of the population, you want to add $700 billion to that deficit that we decry every day?
Mr. Griffin, 1 minute response.
Well, there's a lot of fuzzy math here, but I think the critical point is this. It is true that there is not 50% or more. Most small businesses are not going to be impacted by the top bracket, but most innovative, successful small businesses that are doing the hiring, they will be impacted by that top bracket. This is an example of why small businesses and the NFIB, who represent small businesses, have endorsed me. This is a perfect example. And I'll just say this, Cruz, this same group that basically called Mike Ross a felon, said that he committed bribery. I don't agree with Mike Ross on a lot of things, but he's not a bad guy. And this group just did it because he was about to kill the health care law. So we know what kind of group this is. And my opponent, she doesn't think badly of Mike Ross. She took his money and he did a couple of fundraisers for her. So let's just make sure we have the facts on that.
Question 5 to you, Ms. Elliott. Define your position on the estate tax and why.
Well, I just want to say quickly, though, about small businesses and this pretense that those folks in the 2% bracket create all the jobs and the innovation. If that is the case, there have been a good 8 years they had these tax breaks. So the question then is, so where are all those jobs and all that innovation that they're now suddenly going to do? No applauding. And so I think it's important that we remember that this is the kind of thing that can be said. It seems to have legitimacy, but when you examine the net effect, it maybe is not there. And I'm sorry, what was the question, Mr. O'Neill? You lost it too?
No, I got it. Define
Okay.
your position on the estate tax and why.
The estate tax.
In 8 seconds.
In 8 seconds, I got it. Well, no, I think it's important. I think it's important that we take a look at the estate tax because, and I'll get some redirect here, I guess, because, I mean, there are some legitimate issues in Arkansas that we need to consider, and I'll come back to it.
Mr. Griffin,
O'Neill.
your response.
First of all, with regard to the tax cuts and small business, I never said that all of the innovation and all the jobs came from that bracket. I say that a lot of the most successful businesses are in that top bracket. And small businesses have been creating jobs. They've been creating jobs for years. If you'll go up to the Fayetteville Shell, you'll see lots of small businesses creating jobs every single day, and they've been a big part of why this state has fared better than some other states. Now, with regard to the estate tax, I just think or the death tax, depending on what you call it, I think that the whole concept of taxing someone throughout their life on just about everything they do, and then when they build up this family nest egg or what have you, and then when they die, they're taxed again, I think the whole concept is just ridiculous. And if you talk to farmers, in fact, I'm not involved in the Senate race, but my recollection is Senator Lincoln is for elimination of the estate tax, and because it hurts families, and I'm for a complete elimination of the estate tax.
We will ask the question again of you, Mr. Griffin. Define your position on the estate tax and why.
Heard that question before. Well, as I just said, I mean, I think the whole concept of having a farm family or any other family build up a business all their life upon which they are taxed, and then when there's a death, they're taxed again. I think it's a bad concept. It's a bad way to do business. I also think that with just like the 0103 tax cuts, whether the estate tax moratorium, which is currently in place, whether it's going to be extended or not, is a separate issue from the substance. I mean, we need some certainty coming from the Congress and the administration, separate from whether you're for it or against it. Folks in business need to know the rules. They need to know the rules of the game. And this Congress had an opportunity to clarify on some of this stuff and decided to just come home instead. The reason was a lot of the Democrats were going to vote for extending all the tax cuts. And Speaker Pelosi didn't want that defeat or victory, depending on how you see it, and so they just came home. We need less uncertainty.
Ms. Elliott, your response?
On the estate tax?
Yes.
I think it is legitimate for us to question whether or not we need to lower that tax. I think that is absolutely the case. And it's really important, though, I think, to get the wording right. I was at UCA the other day, and a student asked me about the death tax. And if we're going to be into real policy, we need to stop being cute and funny with words. It's not a death tax that happens just because you die that makes all of us think, whether we have estates or not, this has something to do with us, because it does not. You have to pay millions of dollars to be impacted by the estate tax. And I think it's important, though, that we not punish people just because they happen to be fortunate enough to have an estate. So I am absolutely open to discussing lowering that tax, because I think it's a bit high, and it's a legitimate question that we need to consider, even right here in Arkansas.
Mr. Griffin, question number 6 goes to you. Character has become a central issue in this campaign. You've already touched on it, and in some cases, character has become biblical proportions. What do you find lacking in your opponent's past performance?
I'm not going to talk about my opponent's character, except to say that I have been attacked relentlessly throughout this campaign. I know that's part of campaigns. I've been in campaigns. But I'm used to the facts being used. And in this particular campaign, there's been a lot of distortions. You know, there's for example, I found out the other day that apparently there's an allegation that started on a blog that's now asking for contributions so it can stay up. But apparently I have apparently misrepresented the fact that I prosecuted 40 cases in the military. So I pulled out my spreadsheet and I looked, and I actually prosecuted more than 40. But I have the spreadsheet with the names and the cases. I even called my commander from the Army, and I said, you're not going to believe what my opponent's saying, what the websites are saying, what our sitting congressman has repeated, that I somehow lied about that. So my commander said, well, have them call me, and I'll walk them through the 40-something cases. I'm sure that won't happen. I'm sure there'll be no retraction. But this blog mentality, where you just take whatever people put on a blog and repeat it, that's not the way I do business.
Ms. Elliott, 1-minute response.
Well, I think character does matter, and I think I can see there is a nexus between the discussion about uncertainty and character, because when we stand before you and ask us to vote for us, you ought to be in a position to believe what we say, and you ought to be in a position to question if you say one thing on one day and then when it becomes uncomfortable, you change it and you have a different position 2 or 3 months later. That creates some uncertainty about the people who are standing before you and asking you to vote for them. What we have done with our public lives and how we have done it matters, and that's where character comes in. And it is totally illegitimate, and I think irresponsible if you think that we can stand before you and ask you for your vote and not have character be a part of how we've conducted ourselves and what we've done. And so it's not just a matter of an attack, it's about taking responsibility for our actions and taking responsibility for the positions that we've taken.
And we re-ask the question of you, Ms. Elliott, what do you find lacking in your opponent's past performance?
If by past performance you mean, I assume, other careers, what I've pointed out is that I find lacking, for example, I went to hear those U.S. attorneys when they came to the law school because I wanted to know more about, from their perspective, what had gone on. I do find it troublesome that Mr. Griffin got his job as a U.S. attorney, not according to what I've said, but according to what the Inspector General's report tells us. I've got a copy of it right here. That at the same time that he was being friendly with Mr. Cummins, he was spreading rumors about him, or slander, whatever you want to call it. I'm being friendly with you right now in an email exchange, but I'm telling folks behind your back that I've heard that you, I didn't say it, I'm just reporting I heard you were lazy. I do think it is absolutely problematic when we say on one day we support fair tax, flat tax, but when it comes down to it and questions are asked, all of a sudden we have different positions. Yeah, character matters.
Mr. Griffin?
Character is absolutely critical. And I think if you're voting on character in this campaign, you should vote for me. And let me tell you why. First of all, if you read the entire IG report, which I am intimately familiar with, all the details, you will find that the list of people to be replaced as U.S. Attorney was put together before I ever stepped foot at the White House. I had no knowledge of it and no input in it. I was blessed to be asked to be U.S. Attorney. I was honored to serve. And if you want to know, you want to pick anything in my life that's been a constant for 14 years, look at my military record. All of my military evaluations, not by blogs, not by editorialists, by my superior officers in the U.S. military. They have graded me year after year after year without any of this politics in mind. All of my evaluations are on my website. They talk about my integrity. They talk about my work ethic. They talk about my legal ability. All of it is right there for you to see, and I would welcome if you would go to my website and view that.
Ms. Elliott, the next question to you. The Supreme Court ruling of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission has opened the corporate campaign finance floodgates. Also, according to the Center for Responsive Politics, in 1998, Wall Street spent $1.44 billion on lobbyists. 2009, that group and that spending had gone up to $3.47 billion. Does corporate America have too much influence in American politics?
Yes. I think to treat corporate America as if corporate America is a human being really stretches the imagination of what our framers had in mind, when they wrote the Constitution. We all are entitled to one vote. That's an equalizer. But we are not all entitled to, and we don't all get the benefit of the money that corporate America is putting into these campaigns. And it is absolutely perverting the system. If we can have folks who can put millions of dollars into a campaign in Arkansas and we don't even know who's doing it, we can't even question it because they're not accountable for showing for the money that they put into the campaigns. They just create a front group. And as I understand it right now, no, I don't have the support of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. All that big money that's going into the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to support somebody in this state is my opponent, not the person who has actually worked to create jobs in the state. That seems a little strange.
Mr. Griffin, your response?
Again, lack of facts. Let me explain. The Chamber of Commerce endorsed me, but it's my understanding that they haven't given me 1 cent. I'll have to check I don't think they've given me 1 penny in this race. They certainly haven't run any ads on my behalf. So the idea that the Chamber of Commerce, now they're spending money elsewhere. They're spending it in another race, but they're not spending it on my behalf. So that is, again, incorrect. I am all for disclosure and transparency. whether it be for corporations or for unions. While my opponent has not had a lot of business community support, she has had an overwhelming amount of union support, and most of them, from what I've seen, are out-of-state unions. And, you know, that's their right, but whatever rules we have on disclosure and transparency need to apply not only to corporations and individuals, but they need to apply to unions. And there's only one person on stage who's ever lobbied. I'm not a lobbyist. I've been accused of being one, never lobbied one day in my life.
Once again, the question, Mr. Griffin, does corporate America have too much influence in American politics?
Yes. I believe we need transparency and disclosure. And a lot of people have been against some of the legislation that deals with transparency and disclosure that's pending in the House and the Senate because there were carve-outs for the unions. And so I just think everyone needs to be under the same umbrella of disclosure and openness. Now, I can tell you, in terms of my campaign and my opponent's campaign, under the FEC rules with regard to individual contributions, PAC contributions, there is complete disclosure. I think it's $200 and up. But we both provide, just like other federal candidates, we provide the name of the people who give and the amount of the contribution and all of that stuff as required by federal regulations.
Ms. Elliott, your response?
Sure. Well, I never said the Chamber of Commerce was providing money to Mr. Griffin's campaign. I was making the point that the Chamber of Commerce has become a part of the problem when it comes to Citizens United. You don't have to spend money here to be a part of that problem. And as far as my being a lobbyist, I've been a teacher for all these years, and when I worked for an education company, they required us to put our names on the book and say that, yes, we are working to make education better in the state because we're talking to lawmakers. I'm proud of that, because being a lobbyist in and of itself is not a bad thing. I made a pittance working as this person trying to improve education compared to Mr. Griffin, who made roughly $440,000 working for a lobbying firm, not as a lobbyist, mind you, according to him. But if unions were not supporting me, and yes, I'm supported by unions, you know, I have to raise money like everybody else. But it is inaccurate, Mr. Griffin, when you say it's out-of-state unions as if in-state unions can give me money. It's a federal election. And I don't know about you, but I only take money from federal PACs because that is the law.
Mr. Griffin, the next question to you. What makes you the better candidate to prepare our kids to compete in this global economy?
First of all, I would say that it's interesting with regard to the unions. I think the debate over unions and education is one that we ought to have. This new movie, Waiting for Superman, is one that folks should go take a look at. It's a critical part of how we reform. Now, back in, I think it was May, my opponent was speaking to a union group, and she told the union group that when I got into education, the first thing I asked was, where's the union? Well, we need more folks, first thing they ask is, where are the kids? And I think that the role of unions in our educational system is something that needs to be, and is being widely and openly debated. With regard to my candidacy, I have, well, it looks like he's left the room, but I have a 7-month-old somewhere, and I have a 3-year-old. And I believe they would best be served by a congressman who will serve as a check and balance on this administration and this Congress. And my time is up.
Ms. Elliott, your response?
Well, when I became a school teacher, I had already prepared myself to do what I needed to do to teach kids. And I'm not ashamed to have been a member of a union. And to continue this effort of beating up on working folks is something I don't understand. Because this is America, and people have a right to join a union. And I promise you, you can't find anybody who will tell you that because I was a member of a teachers union, that I didn't every single day teach my heart out. I chose to make that sacrifice to make a little money to teach kids. And being a member of a union did nothing to cause me to be a teacher who was not worthy of being there. And I just resent this notion of keep pretending that because working people want to have a voice, the way every business wants to have a voice through the Chamber of Commerce, and I have no problem with that, that somehow we are less than. And we're going to talk who's done the things we should do to teach kids. I don't think there's much of a comparison here.
Audience, stifle, wait for it, hold it off. Okay, we'll ask the same question of you, Miss Elliott. What makes you the better candidate to prepare our kids to compete in this global economy?
One, I've spent a lifetime doing it. And secondly, I never stopped searching for ways to make sure our kids are better prepared to compete in this economy. For example, we just heard a couple of weeks ago that our students in Arkansas lead the nation in math and science courses and their improvements in making 3s, 4s, and 5s on advanced placement courses. When you take an advanced placement course, you compete with the world, not with Arkansas. You compete with the world. I am happy to say I had a hand in making sure that policy and that program was put in place, because I saw what was happening with our kids when I was teaching and what was happening in other countries. And when former State Representative Jody Mahoney, the late Jody Mahoney, and I got together to pass a bill in this state to require that every child has AP classes, I mean, that was a big move, and it was part of what led us to where we are now, that we are leading the nation in math and science courses.
Mr. Griffin, your response.
Well, first and foremost, working folks in this state, working folks, many working folks, as they've been called, are not in unions. We only have about 4% in the unions. There's a lot of working folks, union and non-union, who are supporting me in this election, because ultimately the best thing for however you define working folks, I know a lot of people that are working folks, but the best thing you can do for working folks is create jobs. And the best way to create jobs is to go to the people who actually create them and ask them, what can the government affirmatively do, or what does the government need to quit doing to help you create jobs? No one is better off if we don't have businesses creating jobs. And that's the best thing that you can do for working folks. And I might add, my mom, as a teacher, and my dad's a preacher, I think they were working folks all their lives. So I don't know how we're defining working folks, but...
Finally, we have one last question left, and because we're out of time, we will only ask it once and get a response. It's rather cheesy, but it ends on a spirit of bipartisanship. We begin with Miss Elliott. What do you admire most in your opponent?
I tell you, I like the fact that he's the father of a beautiful little girl. I've met Mary Catherine on the campaign trail, and I've seen her many times, and I've had the opportunity to get to know Tim and see him as a father, and I think that's a good thing. And she's a sweet little girl, and I think if she grows up to be the kind of young woman that she is a little girl, she will be a great citizen in this country.
Mr. Griffin.
I think Joyce's civility and kindness, separate from all of this political stuff, I got to know Joyce pretty well, if I could call you Joyce. Senator Elliott pretty well on the campaign trail, particularly in the early days of this summer. And she has always been kind, and she has always been civil, and I appreciate that very much. She was kind to my daughter, who threw the football with her down at Wrightsville Parade, and now, every time we're watching TV, she points out when I'm on TV and when Joyce Elliott's on TV. And we didn't bring her today because she probably would be up on stage asking Joyce to throw the football. But I have appreciated this. I understand how campaigns get But at the end of the day, I think that she has been civil, and I appreciate that very much.
We have now reached the closing, and after the coin toss, we will begin the 2-minute closing with Ms. Griffin. Mr. Griffin. Excuse me.
This is the part of the program where Elizabeth comes up and gives my closing. Did you say we're going to flip the coin?
No, we've already flipped the coin.
Okay.
You get the
I wasn't
2-minute
there
closing.
for that. I wasn't there for that.
Sorry about that.
But in any event, well, thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate your civility here today. I know there are folks here from both sides, and I appreciate you, at least most of you, not clapping. But I appreciate you all giving us this opportunity to debate. I think there's a clear choice in this race, and if you are happy with the way this country is going in terms of this administration and this Congress, then don't vote for me. Vote for my opponent. Now, I understand that no one's going to be with anybody 100% of the time, but I think that as a general matter, my opponent is going to support the folks in her party. And that's nothing for her to be ashamed of, and I'm sure she's not. But I just think there's a clear choice. If you think we need an alternative voice, a check and balance, if you will, on some of the stuff that's going on in D.C., whether it be card check or cap and trade or the debate on the tax cuts, the health care law, you name it. If you think we need a check and balance on that, as I do, then vote for me. I think we have a clear choice. And with regard to my background, I would welcome you to go and look at my military records on our website. They're all there from 96, I think, when I got in, to the present. At the end of the day, all the other reasons aside, I got in this race after a lot of prayer and discussion with my wife because we felt like we could stand on the sidelines or we could get involved. And over a year ago, we got in this race. Most campaigns have a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but ours has had mostly ups. And I just thank all the people who have supported me. And if you haven't supported me and you've been civil, I thank you for that. I need your vote. I need your help. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Elliott.
At least you're balanced. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and thanks again to Political Animals Club for sponsoring us and to the Clinton School of Public Service. As I said in my opening comments, it's been absolutely a privilege for me to serve Arkansas. It's been a privilege to be in public service, and not once have I ever thought it was not worth it. But you know me. I have served here for a lot of years. And I don't care how many times my opponent or anybody else says, I'm going to go to Washington and do what somebody tells me to do. It must make you wonder, because you've been here and you know I'm nobody's lackey. This campaign is absolutely not about President Obama. It's not about Nancy Pelosi. It's not about Harry Reid. This campaign is about which of us will be your choice. And I think that is the central question. Who can you trust to tell you the truth today? And that will be the same truth I will tell you if I'm so privileged to be elected to be your Congresswoman. It does matter what we have done with our professional lives. And my life has been on display in this state as somebody who's committed to small businesses, who's committed to education, who's committed to working families, who's committed to making sure everybody has a fair shake. It is about the senior citizen who came up to me in White County and said, I just want to give you this bracelet because this is all I've got to give you. It is about the young woman I ran into in the store who said to me, I'm so glad you're running, Senator Elliott, because we knew you cared before you were running for office. It is about the young woman who said to me on Sunday, thank you for all the work you did on colorectal screening. It's about people I've spent a lifetime of making sure lives are better. I ask for your support. You know me, you can trust me. I promise you, I will be a curator of your vote that you can be proud of.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for our two candidates, Mr. Griffin, Ms. Elliott. Let it ride.